Hello, welcome to Marriage Underdogs Radio Show podcast. I'm your host, Chris A. Matthews, and once again, I have another phenomenal guest. And yes, you're right, it is a licensed marriage and family therapist. I would like to introduce you all to Melissa Dumaz out of California, and she is a licensed marriage and family therapist. How you doing, Melissa? So glad you're here.
I'm good. Thank you, Chris, for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Definitely, definitely. So, for those that have tuned in before, I always like to start with our guests telling us what got you into the field of marriage and family therapy.
That's an excellent question. So it dates back to undergrad. I entered into undergrad with this vision that I was going to become a pediatrician. I've always had this passion to help other people. As a kid, I wanted to be a teacher. And then the older I got, I was like, oh, I want to be a doctor, but I want to work with babies and kids. So I want to be a pediatrician. So I went into undergrad school and took all of the sciences and the chemistries, the biologies, the labs. Became overwhelmed by sophomore year with so many units and realized, like, wait a minute, I cannot go to medical school with C's. And I think even in organic chemistry, I got a D. And I was like, oh, I can't go to medical school with a D. And during that sophomore year, I also took my first psychology class, Psychology 101, and absolutely fell in love with what I learned in that course. And the professor had a therapist come and talk to us about, her field. And at the time, it was called LMFCC, Licensed Marriage Family Child Counselor here in California, which is now known as LMFT, Licensed Marriage Family Therapist. And so I reached out to her, had lunch with her, interviewed her, and just asked her, like, if I were interested in this field, what can I do? And she shared some really beautiful words. And in that moment, I was sold. I was like, oh, yeah, this is exactly what I want to do. And the hardest part, honestly, was in making that decision was going back and telling my mom because she was sold on, oh, you're going to be a doctor. You're going to be a doctor. Parents love to brag on us. And so I said, well, the first question she got, well, are you still going to be a doctor? Can I still call you doctor? And I said, well, if I choose to go on, like I have to get my master's in this field, but if I choose to go on, then I have the option to become a psychologist with a doctorate. And she goes, oh, okay, then there's still an opportunity for you to be a doctor. But I did not pursue education any further past my master's, not as of yet. I've considered it, but as of now, I am an LMFT and proud. I love the field. I love our outlook and our lens and our school of thought, how everything is related to relationship with ourselves, relationship with other people, no matter what it is that we're talking about, even if it's work. And so I'm really passionate about it.
Well, we're glad that you're here because you have a lot of amazing experiences across the field. But one area in particular I want to specialize in for our dialogue today is going to be relationship satisfaction. And we're going to do something really fun today on this episode. We're going to pull out a topic and I'm going to ask you a question around that topic. And I want to hear two things. The first, why couples find problems in this area. The second, a simple, quick takeaway that can help as a solution for couples that may be struggling to enhance satisfaction within this particular area of the relationship. So, the one we're going to start with, the number one reason why couples call, the number one reason why you hear people say they need counseling, communication. So, what do you believe are the areas in which couples struggle the most in when it comes to communication? And then what's a quick tool or assistance to help fix that issue?
Mm, I think one of the main reasons that we struggle in communication is something that goes back to who we are as kids and grade school and childhood, which is that we all learn differently. And so, since we all learn differently, we all interpret and hear things differently. Whereas someone may hear their partner's words by what they're saying, and someone may hear their partner's words by what they're doing or by example or leading by example, or someone may be better heard if they write their partner a letter versus communicating with them verbally. And so just being mindful of like, what is the best way for me to communicate and what is the best way for my partner to comprehend? And commonly when we talk about communication as therapists, or even when I hear other people talking about communication, when couples come in, is they're focused on communication, but we forget what's on the other side of that, which is the comprehension. Like communication is not happening if things are not being comprehended, because you can talk all day long, you can communicate all day long, but if your partner is not comprehending those things that you're saying, whether verbally or non-verbally, then that's where the miscommunication tends to take place, and we feel unheard, we feel unsatisfied, we feel disconnected, just a variety of feelings. I think one of the biggest tools that could be helpful with anybody who's managing challenges with communication and comprehension is one, to identify like, hey babe, what is the best way to communicate with you my concerns? And then, hey babe, what is the best way for you to communicate those concerns? Because we want to make sure that both of our needs are being met, or that we're able to meet somewhere in the middle so that both needs are being met. And then the other part that could be important is I statements. We commonly forget about the value of I statements, and I statements are simply statements that start with I feel. And a lot of times in my practice, and maybe Chris, you've had this experience as well, when you ask someone how they feel, they'll commonly start with, well, I think. I'm like, no, that's a thought. You're already starting with a thought. Or they'll say, I feel like you're not listening. And I'm like, well, that's still not a feeling, that's a thought. Just because you start with I feel like doesn't mean it's an expression of your feelings. And so an I statement is I feel, and then that next word is a feelings word. So I feel frustrated, I feel unheard, I feel disconnected, I feel ignored, and expressing our you are here point with those emotions helps us to communicate our feelings and our you are here point.
We can help couples with I feel statements. I usually will print off a feelings word chart. So the words are right there in front of them. And if you're listening, you can Google feeling word chart and it'll come up.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm glad you said that, because it's so important, because a lot of times people aren't in tune with their emotions, or they don't have the language for it. They're like, I know what it feels like on the inside, but I don't have a word for it. But when they can look at a list, they're able to point out from that list. So absolutely, screenshot it, take a picture of it, keep it in your phone as a handy dandy tool until it becomes more second nature for you to express your emotions. The other value of an I'm sorry, go ahead, Chris.
Well, I was noticing the way that you broke down communication was really important, because when we look at satisfaction in relationships, I'm hearing you mention three parts of communication that tend to be overlooked. First, you have the sending, so the actual message itself. Second, you have the receiver, the person that's obtaining the message. And then third, you have the vehicle, the mode of transmission. So when you broke communication down in three parts, you then defined what it looks like to send, receive, and then the vehicle used to transmit the message in the relationship.
Yes, absolutely. And that is important for us to be able to break it down into bite-sized, digestible pieces. And especially when we're in a place of disconnect with our partner, things can feel or appear overwhelming. The other benefit of an I statement is it takes you out of possibility of blaming your partner for how you're feeling. Yes, it lowers their defensive. It gives you ownership over your feelings. And it says to your partner, I'm not blaming you for this. I'm simply expressing or owning how I feel in this, which then the goal is for your partner to feel less defensive, because a lot of times we're already defended if we get that call or text that says we need to talk. And then everyone's like, oh shoot, defenses go up.
And there are four things we look at, right? Like perspective taking, acknowledging that the person's perspective is their perspective. Number two, staying out of judgment. Number three, finding the emotion the person's attempting to transmit. And then number four, being able to empathize or to feel that same emotion within yourself. And to do those four steps in communication starts with the listener not attempting to formulate the message while the person's talking. So if you're thinking about what you're going to say to your partner, you're not going to be listening entirely. And then that can reduce and lower satisfaction based on sending, receiving, and then the mode used to submit or transmit the message.
Right. Absolutely. There's already blocks there, blockages there before we can even openly communicate with one another.
Definitely. So the second area of relationship satisfaction, conflict. So you have arguments, you have fights. So I want you to break down what areas of relationship conflict do you see in terms of arguments and fights, which immediately decrease relationship satisfaction, and what are a couple solutions for those?
Mm. So, Chris, we haven't talked about this yet, but you are highlighting a lot of points that I make in my book. So, one of the points that I make in my book is I statements, and in there it has a list of feelings, words that couples can use or individuals can use, and then that conflict piece. There is a chapter in my book regarding conflict, and so
Say the
these are
book
some of the
name.
things.
I know we hadn't got to that yet, but just go ahead and address the book name.
Yeah, absolutely. So the book is called The Love Challenge, 30 Days, 30 Ways to Increase the Love in Your Relationship. So each day is a bite-sized something that you can do to increase the love in your relationship and to decrease.
So your book is a relationship satisfaction plan.
Yes, it is.
So
And for 30 days.
Relationship satisfaction is what we're talking about. And that's why I wanted to make sure you are a relationship satisfaction expert. And your book is a testament to anybody listening that wants to immediately enhance relationship satisfaction in 30 days.
Yes, absolutely. And so the conflict piece, the key components of conflict is one, deciding what are our rules for fighting. Because we know and studies show disagreements, arguments, fights, and I'm putting that in air quotes because when I say fights, I mean verbal altercations, not physical. They're going to happen in a relationship. You are in relationship with someone who may have a different upbringing than you, a different way of growing up, a different life experiences, different education, different type of career, different interests. And so we're not always going to agree on every single thing. And so since we know that that is true, then it is best to have a plan on when we fight, when it happens, not if, when we disagree, we have a disagreement. What are our rules on that? What does that look like? And so some of those key rules would be, how do we know when we need space, when the conversation has gotten too heated? How do we know what are our boundaries? Like, is it okay to use foul language? And I'll do this with my couples. And most commonly couples will say they can use foul language like this shit is frustrating, like that, but not necessarily use foul language like F you. Exactly. And so that's a very different use of foul language, if you will.
And it varies from person to person because some couples, just hearing any foul language directed toward or not could be a trigger based on family of origin or religious beliefs or any type of other cultural upbringing.
Absolutely, which is why it's important for us to have that understanding and agreement before we even get to a disagreement.
So I'm curious because it sounds like this tool in your book creates a conversation for couples to assess what's practical, what's appropriate, what's not practical, what isn't appropriate, and to have that conversation in the courtship, the dating, premarital, and then you can use Melissa's book to update that plan because as things change in the relationship, the way you handle conflict can change as well. And it sounds like your book is an ongoing tool that these couples can use.
Oh, absolutely, because we're changing and our relationship is changing, which is why we have to update our records, if you will, to whatever that newest information is. Just like we update our phones, we update our devices, we update our own data as well as we're changing and as our partner is changing. So in some families' cases,
so your book isn't a one-time read. This is an annual.
Oh no, it's an anytime read.
So you buy this book. You buy copies for your friends, your relatives. You make sure that when you get a purchase copy of this book, that you disseminate out to everybody in your tribe because it's actually a major resource is what I'm hearing.
Right, absolutely. And it's a tool that doesn't have to be read from front to cover. You could pick it up at any given point in your relationship and look at the table of contents and say, you know what, we need this today. I mean, naturally, just like with anything else in life, the tools build upon each other, but you could easily pick it up and go to one specific tool and make use of it in that very given moment.
Gotcha. So when we transition to another core area in relationships, I'm going to break this down because intimacy is defined different by certain people. A lot of men, a lot of couples, they hear intimacy and they immediately think of sex. But intimacy is essentially closeness, connection. So talk about areas where you see a reduction in relationship satisfaction when it is associated with intimacy and connection.
I call it lazy love.
Mm.
And we are all guilty of it at some point. And what lazy love is essentially when you put your relationship, the intimacy of your relationship, on autopilot. Everyone gets into a zone, into a mode where they're not thinking about it. And there are some things that deserve to be on autopilot, like how to get to your office, how to get home from work. That deserves to be on autopilot. We don't need to relook that up or remap it each time we want to go. But when we start to put our love or our relationship on autopilot, that's when you start to hear couples say, I feel taken advantage of. I feel disconnected. I feel unseen. I feel ignored. We haven't had a date night in a while. When's the last time we made love? When's the last time we just sat and giggled? And so we have to put things in place that our brains can, if you will, trip over so that we can get off of autopilot and back onto being intentional about the way we show up with each other.
So I want to speak to that for a second. You just hit a point. You hit a major point. I want to say the phrase again: lazy love. And when men hear that word lazy love, it can be directed toward a female spouse. And I predominantly work with heterosexual relationships, so that's why I'm using heterosexual examples. A man might say, well, the children don't get an opportunity to experience lazy love. They get mommy all the time. But then the pushback from the mom is, hey, if you don't want lazy love, you need to help out more with these kids. You need to be there to assist so my energy is not depleted and I have enough to give you at the end of the day. So talk about how couples can assess for lazy love versus just life transitions. Because when I work with couples that have children, especially 2 within 18 months or 3 under 3 in these certain situations, or twins or triplets, we want to be mindful that that phase of child rearing is equivalent to like a deployment. The main goal is to get through that phase and keep the marriage, right? So talk about, ways couples can assess if it's lazy love or if it's actually just lifing.
Right. Life is gonna life. That we know, like life is not stopping no matter where we are in our season. And I think what we risk is that while life is lifing, or being in a season of like postpartum, or being in a season of our family is growing, that if we're not mindful of the longevity of that season or what each day is looking like, then we can find ourselves unknowingly in this season of lazy love. We can look back and be like, oh my gosh, it's been a month since we made love. How did we get here? And it's the not paying attention. It's the getting into this cycle and this routine day in and day out without some sort of assessment.
So how does a partner address that, right? Because and I'm speaking, I'm being very male dominant, because as a husband, my goal would never be to shame my wife. It would never be to belittle all of the efforts and the work that she does as a mother, a professional. And I want the men, to have empathy, to be able to address this topic so it doesn't feel like a complaint.
Right. Yeah. I think a question, starting with what you're noticing, and then a question. To use your example, Chris, about, a mom feeling like, well, can I get some help with these kids? And maybe I'll have more energy to share for us later, is if, a husband, to your question, is asking or is curious, like, how can I get more of mom? Maybe asking the question, like, I've noticed that we haven't connected in a while. Is there something I can do to help you with the evening routine so that you and I can spend some time together? Right. Asking that question, and maybe mom will have a prompt, or wife will have a prompt. Oh yeah, if you could do this while I do this, that would be helpful. Or maybe mom will be like, oh, I got it. But now that I know, I'm going to intentionally budget my energy throughout my day so that I'm saving some for my husband. Just the same as we may go to dinner and we know we want dessert. We may budget how much we eat off of our plate so that we have room in our belly for dessert. So it needs to be a conversation so that we can budget ourselves and our energy accordingly.
And I'm going to speak to the pushback, because I look at the comments on IG, and I'm always using the comments as an opportunity to speak to multiple perspectives. So one perspective on what you just described, I could see in the comment section is, well, why do I need to tell my husband that the laundry needs to be folded or washed? Why do I need to tell my husband that the kids need help with homework? He should already know that. And I think we get caught up in these mind reading games where we anticipate or expect, and especially if you come from African American household or in other cultures where you didn't really get kudos or props for doing what you were supposed to do. Well, marriage isn't like growing up with the mom who doesn't congratulate or give you validation for things you're supposed to do. Your husband and your wife, for that matter, may need to hear an invitation because we get so comfortable with one another where the lack of communication is prevalent, and then that can reduce the satisfaction. So to your point, we want to create a space in the marriage where every day it starts over again. So we're not having these false expectations that the partner should automatically read your mind and know that you need those tasks to be done. And vice versa, we also want the receiving partner to be mindful that if your partner tells you what they need and you don't do it, then they're not going to feel vulnerable enough to ask you again. So it has to be, a two-way street with those tasks. And I wanted to highlight that point.
Yes, I agree. A two-way street is important. And if we're not able to meet the task, then it would be important for us to communicate that. Like, oh, I know the laundry needs to be done tonight. I need to work on a project that's due tomorrow. I'm unavailable. However, it's on my radar and I plan to get to it. That is something to be communicated. And when we start to find ourselves saying, he should, they should, we should, she should, then we have to start questioning, what does that mean for us? Because now we're putting our partner, ourselves into this box of should, and we're shoulding on ourselves. And if you replace shoulding with another S word, then it's like, wait a minute, I don't want to be shoulding on myself. So what can I be doing to communicate so that I'm not shoulding on myself or anticipating that my partner should be shoulding on anything? The other thing too, we have to be mindful that when we're not communicating those needs and anticipating our partner to just read our minds, we're now putting our partner in full control over meeting our needs met that haven't even been communicated. It's like saying, man, my partner went to the grocery store. I really want dessert for the night. I hope they just pick it up. And then we're anticipating that they're just going to come back with a dessert. And then when they don't, we get disappointed.
Right.
But it's, your partner's like, I didn't know you wanted ice cream. I wish you told me.
And I think about, so I know our time is about to be up, and you've put on a masterclass in this brief session on relationship satisfaction. And I want to make sure before we get off, you present your book again, where it can be purchased. We'll put in the show notes, access and links to you as well on your website. But do mention the book title, where people can purchase it. And I just want to, reiterate that you have definitely done just such a masterful job of putting together content that speaks specifically to relationship satisfaction. And the major point I just heard you mention at the end was making sure that we stay out of the mind reading game and that we continue to communicate what our needs are, and we don't need to be shitting on ourselves. And then in addition, another point you mentioned was to not be stuck in what we might call lazy love. So those two pieces were huge. But once again, book title, how people can reach you, and we'll sign off after that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. My book is called The Love Challenge: 30 Days, 30 Ways to Increase the Love in Your Relationship. It can be found on Amazon. It's on Amazon Prime, so you can get it in 2 days if you have Prime. It is also at Barnes and Nobles. You can also find the link on my website or anywhere on social media that I am located. The core reason for the book was, one, I was in a season of being busy in motherhood. I have 3 kids, and they're all about 18 to 2 years apart. So it was a very busy season for us. And I was meeting other moms, meeting other moms and families who were also in very busy seasons of life. And I work with a lot of ambitious adults who are very busy with work or personal journeys. And so the purpose of the book is that you get this bite-sized amount to read and then a call to action on what you can do to go incorporate this very thing into your relationship right now. And also, the beauty of the book, it's written in a way that you could do the challenge by yourself, not by yourself, but you could do the challenge and your partner not know, and you're still going to reap the benefits. You're still going to see the value. It's going to incorporate change on them because they're going to see you changing and doing things differently. But if you two do it together, then all the better.
Nice, nice. Well, Melissa, it's been a privilege, a pleasure to have you here. You've dropped so many dimes and nuggets. I know that this episode will be a gift to a lot of listeners out there. I hope to have you back at a future date. And once again, we'll put the content in the show notes. For those that have been tuning in, my name is Chris A. Matthews. You've been listening to the Marriage Underdogs Radio Show podcast. We launch new episodes every Tuesday at 10 a.m. on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. We look forward to you joining us next week for another episode.